Welcome back to Hacker Hangouts on another Saturday morning, and we are excited because we're jumping in with Gauri on what is the difference between small company security and enterprise security. And I'm also just shamelessly enjoying the fact that I'm sitting here with Gauri, and you would think after DEF CON we would have had time to debrief and talk about DEF CON and talk about what would we want to do differently. And this is the second time we've actually been able to talk since DEF CON. So Gauri, hi, how are you doing?
Hi. Yeah, I'm doing good.
Good to see
No,
you.
so, we spent our entire life together for I want to say a solid month we were talking. And I need a little break from Silk. And, I need to go spend some time with my wife instead of Silk.
It is one of those funny things because DEF CON feels like a million years ago, and I'm ready for the next
Yeah.
one. And it hasn't been that long. It's been a month. On the other side of things, I also laugh. I have not done a video since then. There we go.
Yeah, I noticed that,
somewhere.
slacker.
I know it is pretty bad. All right, let's jump in. Small business. I'll go ahead and move us to split screen. Small business or enterprise security. I know I'm going to approach this probably much differently than you, and I'll pull from my experience, which is General Electric. I worked for some of the three-letter acronym government agencies for a little bit too, and those were massive. It's weird though, because things like the three-letter acronyms would use things like tens or hundreds of millions, of dollars in revenue. GE would use billions, the word
Billions.
billion would get thrown out. And now, at a small company where I've been, obviously my small company, we're dealing with much smaller numbers than that, 10,000, 30,000, 40,000, depending on the project. And security, from what we do for our clients, is typically small startup companies. But that's not, some of our clients are also those giant enterprises, and they all struggle with very different things.
Well, and I think here's and this is there's a few different aspects of this, right? So one is cybersecurity really all that much different between people who are trying to secure their networks in a small company versus a big company? That's A. And then for a cybersecurity company that is trying to provide services, whether on the offensive or defensive or, those things mix side, who is really best equipped to do some of this work is the question being proposed. Because one can say, for example, that a smaller company will be much more agile and be able to pivot much more quickly as compared to behemoths like GE or Raytheon or GD or any of these massive companies. It takes a lot of effort to turn that boat, right?
Yeah.
Compared to a small company, which could just say, we're not doing that anymore. We're doing this now, right?
But on the flip side, though. Oh, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, but on the flip side, those big companies have the ability to toss out a few $1 million to just have lawyers and cybersecurity policy specialists to sit there and just read the government policies and figure out how to adhere to them the best, as opposed to doing a good enough effort for a small company, right?
So let's start with defining the terms a little bit. Small company, I mean, it's really a small company, medium, large enterprise. And there's a break somewhere around, I'd actually say it's where we are as a company right now. You hit a break somewhere around 14 to 20 people where you actually start having, we'll say, real problems, which are weird to deal with. Things like you can't just have one person wearing all the hats. You start needing HR and benefits and payroll, and you start getting these weird problems. There's no longer, it's not Susie over there who I've known my whole life, who I hired. It's now a friend of a friend of a friend. It's not even an acquaintance. You went out to Indeed to get the next person, and no one knows who they are.
You come into the office one day and you look at the engineering pod and you're like, who are you people?
So I think you hit that. There's that small. Then there's that you start you start opening up your relationships, and you now have to wear different colognes, different fabrics. You have to, you have a new set of friends, and you have now 20 to 50 people, and then you hit kind of larger. You hit 50 to really 500 starts hitting in that range, and then after that, you're really a large enterprise. I think though, I'll throw it out there, is at a small company. So we've defined the terms. At a small company, does security even matter? If you're not providing services, let's just say you're a small company, you're selling a widget. Does security even matter? Like, because
Yeah, I think that as with all engineers, the answer is always, well, it depends, right? Yeah, I mean, if you're taking customer payments, you have to have some kind of security around payments, right? Now, if you're just taking checks from people and providing the widget in response, and there's no, like online portal or anything like that, I think the more physical deals you do, the less it matters. With the exception of anytime you're doing any kind of like bank transfer, right? The securing the company accounts, yeah, that matters. But I think that's going to be less on the company itself and more on the banks and the individuals not to click stupid links that show up in their email box.
yeah, but like, let's get it this way, because you're mentioning like if you're taking credit cards, you have to be PCI compliant. In a small business, like the first objective you're trying to do is a minimal viable product. Like I want to sell something. I want to see if my business can even succeed and grant revenue before I care about security. And this is like one of those weird concepts is when you're a small company, I think we always hear, oh, cybersecurity, you need to worry about cybersecurity. But oftentimes it turns into this, like, you don't really need to care about it. You first see if your company's actually successful. You need to think about security somewhat. But like, let's think two things. One, if you take credit cards, you're not processing your own credit cards. You're using Stripe,
Sure.
you're using PayPal, you're using any of the other payment processors, or if you're using a third-party services, they are probably using those in the back end. You don't need to worry about PCI and things like that.
Also, like there's an extra layer of complexity here. Are you doing commercial work or are you doing government adjacent work, right? Because in government adjacent work, you basically can't operate unless you do certain things. In commercial work, you can do almost whatever you want.
Well, but most of that's driven by contracts. If you're a small company, and this is where we get down probably to the start. If you're a small company catering to large companies, you have to read those contracts. The MSA, the CSA, whatever your contract with the company is, they're going to have requirements. Most small companies we've interacted with sometimes just sign those because they want to have minimal viable product, get the money, not realizing what they're signing up for is like we need to be SOC 2 compliant. Like we need to do full SOC 2 for our entire company. We need to be following NIST. We have a full policy set. And this is where you hit that middle phase where often security for small companies gets driven by the contracts you want to go after. I think
I hadn't really thought about that.
The other thing to consider is think about like massive policies. Let's just say you were given a huge policy set because ultimately here's the controls. You have NIST. Here's all the controls that you have to adhere to. The controls you define in a policy. Policies have procedures which adhere to the policy, and then those procedures end up with evidence. So like I need to have access restricted to only who needs to be necessary for it. The policy.
So here's a good question then, right? Because we're getting into the policy discussions, all those things, and I don't know that the actual individual policies are all that interesting. However, the existence of all the policies and the existence of the contractual relationships that enforce those policies are kind of interesting because what I'm hearing is that I should never ever start my own cybersecurity company because it's a nightmare unless I have somebody who knows what they're doing on how to set these things up.
Well, here's a perfect example though. Let's take one policy. Access control. You're a 4-person company. You all wear every hat under the sun. This is why, like, it's funny. Most people have ever been part of like a small friends startup. The first thing everyone discusses is like, what will our titles be? And the answer, like, if you've ever actually done an actual startup, it doesn't matter because you're already doing everything. Everyone has to do everything all the time. But access control policy at a small company, everyone has access to everything. It's fine if everyone as long as like you're saying you're in technology, everyone can have Google admin because if one small person is required to do all of the onboarding for anyone new, that's all that person's job is going to be is do onboard, set passwords, reset passwords. Like everyone has it. So in small companies, access control, like the access control policy is wide open. What's weird though is as the company grows, that access control policy needs to start getting tightened. And this is, I think, where some massive vulnerabilities happen because companies grow and never revisit back to their security.
Yeah. I mean, the access control policy when you have 4 people working for you is, yes, I know your face and I see that your laptop has not been stolen today. Uh, right? Like, so I know the physical access issue is not a problem. And then there's just a matter of making sure, you're not pushing proprietary code up to the public GitHubs,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
But
it's all
yeah,
these weird problems you start having. Also, like the minimal viable startup right now often uses third parties. It's
yeah,
very weird too, because when you think about it, if you're using AWS, you can inherit part of their SOC 2. Just because you're using SOC 2 infrastructure doesn't make you SOC 2, because there's other aspects to it. But the technology stack, you're not running servers in your house anymore. You're running them in AWS or a digital droplet or Heroku or something like that. So it's weird to me, because when you're a startup now versus earlier, you're now immediately on someone else's product, which has already been hardened.
So then, actually, there's a nice question here, because we're talking about what does security mean to small and big companies. I think the big company one is not all that interesting, because it's like, if you're that big, yeah, you should start to have actual standards, follow things like NIST, follow things like various accreditations, things that have been worked through largely between large companies and the government already, especially when it comes to the banking and all that stuff. And I think that's relatively straightforward. The question is that who can really service these companies who are going through growth or have already experienced growth or aren't at growth yet but are expecting it? Who's in the best position to actually service these companies as cybersecurity experts? Are small cybersecurity companies best fit to help other small and medium companies secure their networks, or do we think, or not secure their everything, or do we think like a place like General Dynamic has a place to help medium-sized business figure out how to secure themselves, or is the money just not there to do that?
So obviously, I'm trying not to say like, yeah, that's what our company does. That's what my company does. But
Yeah.
this is what we find all the time, is that you have a virtual CISO. This is now like a new title, which never really existed until recently. Is most small companies do not have the need for a full-time CISO. Really, for someone whose whole job is just securing the company. Very, very rarely are we seeing that for people who have less than 20 employees. They need someone part-time. And really what they need more than anything else is someone just declaring strategy. And that sounds like so weird. Like it's when you look at something like NIST. NIST has, 180 different controls. And even they usually expand them. Like let's say SOC 2. SOC 2 has I think 125 controls. Yet, if you get through an auditing body, they're going to add all their extra things on there. So it's like 360 controls.
You're such a policy nerd. I love it.
Well, here's the thing, though. I'm going to get to my point of why I hate policy in so many ways, because every one of those controls has 15 different ways you could satiate it. And it's up to the auditor to require either one way to satiate it or 15 different ways to satiate it. But I want to get to your question, which is how do you do this at a small company? And this is why you have the CISO. Even if they want to go over to those big contracts, we want to go after SOC 2, we want to get that. You need someone to actually look at it and say, okay, strategy-wise, don't worry about access control. You're too small. You're running an application. Where is the client data stored? Is it encrypted? Cool. Let's come up with a data security policy and then come up with the technical controls to do that. You really need someone who's looking at strategy when you're a small company. You don't need a full-time security guy, because most of these things are nothing in security is difficult. And I know it sounds like it's a weird way of saying it. But
that's kind of one of the amazing things that I've learned, right? Over the years of working in this area, it's always out of ignorance. Everything's always out of ignorance. When mistakes happen or breaches happen or these things, it's almost never malicious in terms of an insider doing something. Almost never. You occasionally run into that. But it's always out of ignorance, where people just, like you said, the growth happens and no one revisits it. Not because someone actively went, screw that, I don't want to worry about it. It's because there's other things to do at all times of the day. But yeah.
Yeah, the other funny part with this is I can talk generalities around pen testing. So we do pen testing. I did pen testing my entire career, most of my entire career, everything from applications, mobile apps, but a lot of them are networks. it was interesting because you've heard me say this. There's never been a network that we have failed to get into or domain admin. And I say this, that's really their caveat there is for large companies. When you're a small startup, you have what? 2
There is
external
no
IP
network.
addresses? Yeah, there's no
Yeah.
network. There's no network. But let's just say you're a services company. Say like you have your marketing website. That's through like WP Engine or GoDaddy or any number of these hosting providers. Even if someone got in there, the worst they can do is deface the website. Now that's obviously there's other caveats to that. I get it. But it's not on your infrastructure. They don't get into a network. They get into someone else's network whose whole job is just to detect these things. You have maybe
This is a
2
good
IP
question
addresses.
from before we get further. Wi-Fi Addict. At what company size would a CISO level position be required? I think this is the one that Silk could definitely answer.
Yeah.
From what
So
he's seen.
I would say what you would do is when security becomes an issue is usually when, depending on the business and depending on what you're selling and things like that, it's probably somewhere around like 10 employees. You're going to have to start doing a head fake in the realm of security. Normally because a client's asking for it. This is not a full-time position at this point. I would say once you hit around like 20 people, like, and this is such a generality, that's when you're going to start needing someone like virtual who's doing like part-time job as their CISO. I think full-time CISO is somewhere around like 40 or 50, but usually that like it'll be a shared title, CIO and CISO, CTO and CISO. Usually you won't get like a dedicated CISO until you're like around like 100 people or something like that, whose sole job
that
is
makes
just security. But
because by the
it
time
all
you get to 100
depends.
people, by the time you get to 100 people, your engineering section is at most half of your company, right? Because you got sales and you got all the other, HR, all the other support positions, which means that your GUI interior, if you will, because we all know that engineers are terrible at securing their own boxes. Your GUI interior becomes complex enough that you have to really sit down and think about this long and hard. And how do you segregate the administrative people from the engineering people so that even if the administrative side of the house gets popped, they don't necessarily get access to the goods, right? And that makes sense.
And I think the other piece of this too, though, is someone is typically doing the CISO work before then, but it's not their whole job. They're doing it tertiary. And then what will happen is you're going to contract at realistically, you might be going after contracts to require you to do a lot of CISO, and someone on a contract will have to be declared as who's the chief privacy officer, who's the chief security officer. When an incident happens, who do we reach out to? And that's on the contract.
So this is all I would say from the defensive side of the house, right? Like, how do I make my GUI interior hard to get to, right, at my company, and what kind of companies can really service that? I think the answer there, to be honest, like when we point at these big boys, like big boy contractors, even at the Mandiants or the FireEyes of the world, do we think FireEye is gonna even bat an eye at a 50-person company? For how much money are they going to, how much money can they realistically, or will they realistically be able to spend on a virtual CISO at that level versus, are those size companies in one way or another stuck looking for the 2X of the world that are smaller? And not that you don't do a good job. It's just a matter of like, does a service provider at the level of FireEye outrun the larger market because they just can't afford to take on small clients anymore, if that makes sense?
I would answer that in kind of a weird way because we have some of our contracts are enterprise clients, large companies. And what's interesting about that, what we've seen is a couple different things. When you get to that level, and this is speaking in generalizations, and I know I'm biased. When you get to that level, typically it follows the almost the stapler approach, and I'll go into that analogy in a minute, but it's like, oh, you have a security program, you don't have a security program. Okay, here's the NIST template, here's the policy set, here's the procedures. Okay, here you go do it. Or they take that and they're maybe tweak it a little bit But at that point, it works like a McDonald's. You come in, you have this set. This is what we're adhering to. This is the plan that works out. Here's what we're going to end up doing. In smaller companies, you usually get a little bit more agile, where it's you do this instead of saying, like, the big companies tend to do top down. Here's the controls. Here's the policies. Let's just start moving you towards these things because this is the ideal way to do it. What we find within, like, when you're a smaller company and you have a little bit more time with it, what we do is you go, what are you doing operationally? Is what you're doing operationally, meaning, like, what are you actually doing throughout the day? And what we find is if they're doing the right thing, they just haven't documented it. And most companies are doing the right thing. They might be missing a few things or focused on very specific areas, but they just haven't documented it. And what you usually get with smaller companies is a little bit more customization around it and not just a one size fits all. Again, this is a massively generalization. I think, though, I don't think they outpace. I think what I found is most prices within this industry are pretty competitive. Like, they're all about the same, with the exception when you get the Oracles of the world, where they go, how much money does your company make? Okay, here's what your license is.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, like that. Oracle's known to do that. I'm throwing them under the bus because we've done this at General Electric, where it was like, what's the price for an Oracle license? Well, how many servers? How much money do you have? How big is your wallet? Yeah, it's exactly what it is. Pen testing does that oftentimes too. But even pen testing in general is
like, on the pen testing side, that sort of makes sense, right? Because there's this, at least when you get to these large companies, you're not really like let's say in theory we were contracted to go out and pen test Microsoft. You're not pen testing the $1 trillion Microsoft, the company. You're pen testing a small business unit within it. And that small business unit might be 50 to 200 people, right? Yeah, it's not like you're going to go to main campus and hack an entire building. No, it's like, here, try to hack these few offices in the corner, right?
This is why scoping is so important at large enterprises. Because, like, one of the things, we've had that before where they're like, it is a large enterprise. And they're like, just pen test the entire thing. It's like, you have 500, like, GE had 500,000 endpoints. When I was there, like, this is public information. They owned the 3-dot network before Amazon bought it.
Yeah.
3.x.x.x was all GE, and they used it, like, internally. Like, it was like every system was completely routable. Again, all public information, all out there. Like, how do you protect that? How, like, that is the piece where it's like large enterprise deal with is 500,000. Like, look at so Uber was hacked, like, over the weekend, or, like, this past week. And look at what they did. It wasn't like they got into one employee's thing. One employee, not even a privileged employee account. One employee across the entire enterprise. They got in, and then they started searching network shares. And they found a network share which had source code in it. One of the pieces of source code was a Thycotic API. Now, here's the part where I actually laugh at, because I saw a bunch of this on the Twitter sphere talking about, like, why does one account have access to everything? Well, it's because it's Thycotic. It's like 1Password or LastPass. Its entire job is to hold every password so you don't have to. So it was one API, one service account that had too many privileges. And then, as I hit stuff off, and then that gives access to everything. It's not like, why does this one person? They had access to the password keeper. And then they went on Slack and did a bunch of stuff. But, like, this is apparently like the weird thing. Yeah, it was an 18-year-old.
Yeah, it was an 18-year-old that got in, and then, well, somebody's going into prison.
Like, this is the part which just frustrates me, because at large enterprises, and again, this is going to get a little on the soapbox. At large enterprises, like, I think it was Mudge went on, like, Twitter talking about, like, when he worked at Twitter. I don't know if he still does. When he was working at Twitter, he was ranting that he continually brought up security stuff, and then no one did anything about it. This is normal. Like, surprise, this is normal. Like, when you have a huge enterprise, their job is to manage risk, not mitigate risk. It's to manage risk, like, accept it in many forms.
That is actually on topic here. Follow-up question and this is from Wi-Fi Addict again. At what point is it beneficial to hire internal red and purple teamers? and also blue teamers. And this is kind of at what point do you start hiring your own security people, right? At 100 people, I think you could get away with having one dedicated security individual along with whoever your CISO is, right? That's and the question is like, put into discrete numbers. The average cybersecurity engineer is going to cost you probably north of 6 figures. Probably we'll just say $120, but that's the upfront cost. Like that's just their salary. After you pay all of their benefits and all of the insurance and all of those other things that companies have to pay, really realistically, it's going to be like 180, maybe 200,000. Generally speaking, I just say the overhead is double for large corporations. At this point, if you're talking about hiring these individuals to secure internally, we're talking about a large business at this point. So your average cybersecurity engineer, just off of your like what is the bottom line cost of this person is like $200,000. So you would talk about hiring a team. That's about 5 people. This is $1 million a year that you have to spend on this. The point at which you spend that $1 million a year is when either A, you can get that $1 million a year written into a contract and covered by a contract that you're working, at which point, why wouldn't you expand? Or B, the pressures from the customers will force you to actually have this type of internal security team in order to win contracts in the first place, or win work in the first place, or sell work. Now, for folks like Uber, and this is the thing that I think is hard for people to understand. Everyone looks at Uber and goes, "Oh, their service is sending drivers to people to pick them up." Well, that's not the only thing that Uber does. Corporations at that level have many different ways to bring in revenue, and part of that is going to be sharing data with other corporations and anonymizing data and then selling that as an information stream. Or like it's hard to say internally the other revenue sources that big corporations have, but whatever the commercial thing that Uber, or I don't know who else to really, we're picking on Uber because they got hacked over the weekend, but like whatever the commercial service Uber provides, you can be guaranteed that there is swaths of money coming in from other sources that are, tangential to that primary commercial service, because they're collecting data and that data is valuable.
Well, even like the outside the obvious of rides, they have Uber Eats. And Uber Eats, they take a percentage. That's why food is more expensive on the menu, because they're taking that restaurants are raising their prices because they take a percentage of that. It's not an insignificant piece.
Mudge is still at Twitter.
Yeah. So like I get I get their rant. But the Wi-Fi addict, I'm going to answer the question differently, which is it depends. Obviously, it depends. But here's the piece. The first question I'm gonna ask any company, if they go, "What should we hire an internal purple team or red team?" The thing that Gowrie didn't even mention was tools. But first, I'm gonna ask, before you hire a red team, are you doing network scanning, like just unauthenticated network scanning with Nessus, Qualys, open source tools, Insert, whatever? Are you doing any of that? The answer is no. Don't hire anyone. Why are you hiring anyone? Just run an automated scan. Then run authenticated internal scanning. Same thing with applications. My gosh, it is amazing to me that companies will hire people in us and they don't do DAS scanning, like on their own apps. It's free. You can grab open source, or like you run. Oh, we have Ruby code. Great. Did you install Bundler Audit just to run static code analysis on your tool? It's free. It's right there. There's tons of free tools. Zap and Arachne. Like Paris is the old tool. Arachne, like there's massive numbers of open source tools. Why are you hiring a team to do like advanced penetration testing when you can get away with just like automated scanning until you have no critical vulnerabilities, and then you need someone to actually come in and do it? So like, when do you hire a red team? When your security program matures enough, when your program matures enough as required by the company and your contracts, and then when that team has done like the bare minimum for so many things. So
I got it wrong. Mudge is like pseudo at Twitter. He's being paid a large severance by the company, and that's why one of the reasons why Musk is trying to cancel the deal, which I don't want to get into that. Musk can go to hell.
That is
Uh,
interesting statement.
yeah.
Not a
Uh,
sponsor.
so I mean, and that's the big thing is that we were getting back to like is Mudge still at Twitter, and apparently he's getting the severance in part because he was a whistleblower at one point, and that's like they're just ending they're ending the relationship, if you will, and making sure everyone is happy and keeps their mouth shut.
It was just like one of those ones though, which it cracks me up though, because he went on a rant saying that he brings up security vulnerabilities and they're not doing anything. It's like, yep, that's par for the course at every large enterprise. Because again, when you have,
and
we haven't even got into like weird ones, which is like example, small companies like MDM, like for instance, like people need their email, they want to be plugged in, they want email on their phones and things like that. Company hasn't made enough money to buy everyone laptops or buy everyone phones. So everyone's using their own personal devices and they're putting personal emails on there and they're emailing. That's startups. That's how that works. Like you don't have money to buy everyone a phone and put MDM, like things like single sign-on, which is just like, we'll say like is normal for large enterprises. It is massively expensive. It's like 30,
I was going to say
$30, $40, $50 a head. And then you go $50 a head per month plus Office. That's another $20. Most enterprise companies are spending $5,000 just on your infrastructure alone on time. And those are real costs. Those aren't like, oh, make believe like $1,000. No, there's so many costs that go into having an employee that most people don't realize. And companies now have to afford this. And you were expecting like a small company to be able to do this off the bat. It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, just off of like if you've got 5 people and you figure, $100 a month in licenses a year, that's $6,000 a year. That's like you have to get that $6,000 back in revenue somehow, just to be able to continue to work, unless you're going to be reaching into your own pocket to pay for it.
And we're talking about like a single sign-on solution and in Microsoft or Google Apps.
Yeah.
Like that's it. We're not talking, but the moment you add MDM on there, mobile device management, you're now putting on laptops and other devices, you're talking about another $20, $30 per person per device.
And this isn't even, I mean, when we talk about hiring people, remember I said if you internally, just hiring someone and having them on for a year as a cybersecurity specialist, that's $200,000. Like you got to have a real reason to spend that $200,000 on someone who is not going to provide revenue, right? That person's entire job is not to go out and seek work. Like it's not necessarily like as Silk would say, if you're working at an ice cream company, your job is to sell ice cream, whether or not you're actively sitting at the till, right? But at the end of the day, this person is a cost center. And this is one of the things that we always harp on Hangouts, is the fact that this is why everything is always broken forever the end, and why computers were a mistake is because security is always going to be an afterthought because it is a cost center. Why would I spend $200,000 up front to secure a piece of software when I can cobble something together, make a few $1,000,000 in revenue, and go, whoopsie, I found all of my remote code executions after the fact? Why would I do it? Right.
Well, and even more than that is this, there's whole complete conversations which go along to risk, not mitigation, risk management. That's why it's not mitigation. We don't need to mitigate it. We need to manage risk, but it's always this calculation of how much reputation am I going to lose if this leaks? How much damage is it going to cause the company if someone encrypts all of our servers? Like these are all the things that end up happening.
So there is this other side of the industry as well, which is the bug bounty-esque things, and I'm going to call it the offensive side of the industry. So you have the people whose entire intent is to go out and help people set up with policy and I'll say do the boring shit. It's hard, it's boring. In some senses, you have pen testers there, so you're sort of doing the red teaming. But then you have people whose entire job is to just go out and look for vulnerabilities, and then when they find it, move on to the next one and forget about reports. Just report the vulnerability, get paid, move on. And I'm going to call this the offensive side of the industry. Is that side of the industry trapped with small companies, right? Like is a GE or a Raytheon or a FireEye or any of these large, 500 plus member companies or 1,000 or 100,000 member companies, is it actually lucrative for them to do this type of work? Or is that work always going to be and this presents an interesting problem, right? Because I, as an individual, I could go out, hunt bug bounties, get paid 20, 30, 50, 100 grand to find remote code execution in Google Stack or Microsoft Stack or whatever, and just hammer away on it. And I'm taking a gamble because I might not find anything. And if I don't find anything, I don't get paid. But you could do that and you could make a lot of money at it. And there's a lot of people out there making a lot of money at this. And you could start a company off of that, right? You could have 5 people all doing the same thing with no real overhead. You don't need, at 5 people, you don't really need HR. You just need to make sure that everyone's getting paid and everyone knows how to do their taxes. But then as soon as you grow into 20 or 30 or 50 people, you start incurring all of that overhead. Well, now all of a sudden that gamble looks significantly less lucrative because you don't know how long you're going to have to sit on any given service before you pull in money. And at that point, you have to start looking for research contracts where you say, hey, big company, instead of me just dumping in and taking the gamble, I'll do the hard work, the like reverse engineering of your stuff to figure out how you're vulnerable. And then, for a service, I may or may not find anything, but give me money anyway. At what point does that not become lucrative enough? Or does that just pivot everyone into the government sector? Right? Like, is there no choice but to go into government work at that level? I know I just spun a big tale there and a big question, but I've often thought about this because I've seen how this goes we'll say at the enterprise level when you try and sell tools and services to enable people to do this type of work. As soon as they see what you just said, as soon as they see like a $15,000 price tag on a piece of software, they go, we can't fucking afford that. We're a small company. I'm not going to pay a $15,000 license for a tool that I'm going to use and then may or may not allow me to find vulnerabilities faster. And then I'm still taking the gamble as to what I'm actually looking at. So what is the real industry around that? And is it trapped in small companies that are doomed to grow and then collapse in on themselves or get bought out, You
hit a lot. I'm going to try and split it up a little bit because one of the things you mentioned was bug bounty programs. Yes, there's ways of making money. My worry with so many of those programs is that they end up hitting, I want to say the lowest common denominator, but there's 2 ways of approaching it. I'm going to take this piece of software and I'm going to research this one piece of software for this one vulnerability. And what ends up happening with those is that most people don't do them. What they do is they either go after one piece of software or they go wide across many pieces of software, but they find one vulnerability in one of them and then see if that can be duplicated across. And I'm not saying like, a buffer overflow or something like that, like something which is unique to maybe a third-party piece of software that they're leveraging. Oh, yeah. And then when you find one, you scan all the other bug bounty programs for anyone else leveraging that and then turn in the exact same one to all of them. There's just
this is funny because you can make an entire business off of the fact that third-party packaging sucks.
Yeah, so you can do that. The other thing is like the whole other way of doing this is fixing, like you start getting in these weird games with bug bounty programs because you think about something like this. If you have 2 pieces of similar software, they're built similarly. Let's say like screen capture software. They both ultimately do very similar things. So you monitor one for their patches and continually diff their patches. And then when they fix vulnerabilities, you immediately take that and then run it across all the different other pieces of software to see if you can find something similar that hasn't been patched over there. Like there's whole gamification around so many of these bug bounties. And that's where I think they start failing a little bit.
That's a good point. When in that, you can gamify bug bounties in the same way. You can use a lot of things. Maybe my opinion on CTFs is wrong. Maybe I just learned something because in many cases you are going to use the same kind of gamification in CTF land to play the game. And we had a long discussion with the groups running the CTF at DEF CON this year. At the end of the day, CTF is a game, but I would say that, the bug bounty thing that you just described is kind of going against the spirit of the game. But is it? Right? But is it going against the spirit of the game? Because if you find one company patch a third-party piece of software and then you run out and you see that all of these other companies haven't patched a critical vulnerability, should you be rewarded for that? I think it's totally legit, right? Like if you saw somebody in a CTF fire an exploit in the open against another team but not against you, you pull it down, repackage it, and fire it out. That's a legitimate attack.
It's interesting to me because it's like one of the boons of bug bounty, and then one of the downsides of it is that you have this ability to scope your bounties and say, we will pay out bounties for these specific types of exploits, specific types of things, but nothing else. You can submit all the other ones to us, but we're not paying you for them. So it's weird though, because all of a sudden you're saying, don't look at all the other things, only look at this one part. And then it's like, okay, at a certain point, are you getting diminishing returns because now no one's like, you start saying, ignore everything else. I only care about this. Like it's this weird balancing act with so many things.
You have this weird, and this is what I was saying is that, and this is one of the things I hate about bug bounties, is the fact that it puts all of the gamble on the individual that is doing this research. That's it. You either find something or you don't. And if you don't find something, you don't get paid, even though you just functionally donated potentially thousands of hours of your time to searching for vulnerabilities in this company's resources. For what reason, right? If you're having fun with it, great. But, to me, I'm, a little bit of communism here. Don't give your labor away for free. If you're good at something, never do it for free, right?
There's a whole nother aspect here, which I think is funny though, because given enough, I've said this phrase multiple times, but it's hard to believe it, saying given enough time, money, or resources, any system can be breached. Given enough time, because over years and years and years, we find new types of attacks, new vulnerabilities. It is amazing to me that, like, for instance, Google search recently, within the past couple of years, I know there's been other ones, but the one I remember specifically, I think it was 2019, it was a vulnerability, which was a cross-site scripting vulnerability in Google search. Not like within the bowels of the internet, not within like Google Voice or something. It was in the search. When you go to google.com, in the search, you put a piece of code and it executed JavaScript. Like, those things are amazing to me that someone finds those, and Google paid for it. But I almost go like bug bounty programs, in some ways, you look long enough, you're going to find something. But I don't. The reason I don't like them is because there's always this like, how much are they going to pay me? And then how much am I going to have to argue whether or not it's actually within scope or not within scope? It's one of the reasons I left enterprises. Working inside an enterprise, because the politicking just drove me nuts.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is the thing that I hate, is you can read blog post after blog post after blog post of companies, reneging on their bug bounty program, right? Where you submit it and then they refuse to pay out. They maybe patch it, they maybe don't. And at the end of the day, you're left with somebody who spent potentially at least tens, if not hundreds of hours to research this thing, who just, gave away their labor for free. And I kind of hate that. And the reason why that is because you don't have a signed contract, right? Mm-hmm. The company can publicly state something, but they didn't really have a meeting in the minds with you personally. So is there really a contract there? You're left to go to the courts to try and sue for it. And that's why I would never engage.
Typically, the bug bounty programs will, like HackerOne or any of these other ones, they have their team to evaluate it. So what will happen with how those programs typically work is large enterprise has a contract with something like a HackerOne. HackerOne then contracts it out to individuals. You have a contract with HackerOne, and then HackerOne is like the independent evaluator of whether or not it's valid. But here's
that makes sense.
It makes sense.
But what I'm saying is like public bug bounties, and this is actually what I was trying to get at, though, is that in this situation, how realistic is it for those individual, we'll say that the HackerOne, the independent evaluator thing, you set this up. How realistic is it for an individual cybersecurity researcher to actually have a large impact on these companies realistically in their security? So you find a remote code execution, right, in some service, and you get paid out. You took the gamble on that, right? How effective is an individual maybe who has a 1 to 5 person team startup company going after this work and going after these contracts versus, we'll say, like a General Electric team that is building, that has a standing contract with another organization to do this exact work, right? Which of these two teams is going to be more effective? Is the General Electric team going to be more effective because they have more resources available to them? Or is the small company team going to be more effective because they have less politicking to deal with? You know what I mean?
I think this is the evolution of where security is now. The internal teams are moving more and more towards things that require an internal team. Testing prototypes, testing things that haven't been released yet, testing earlier in the development cycle, like before code is pushed production. Like it starts getting more and more scoped to internal tools, internal testing, internal services and networks, because you can't bug bounty those things. You can't open your internal network to someone else. I think the external side is once code is pushed to production, that's where it's like, okay, they can take on over. Squiddy brings up a good point, which is oftentimes, and this is what makes me think of it this way, I think where small teams thrive is when they, like, if you're trying to do a bug bounty program and you're scanning with Zap or Arachne or Nessus or Qualys, you're not going to, again, there's outliers, I get it. You're not going to get money. Like you're not at the level of sophistication needed for the bug bounty programs because those things have already been done. Like typically, again, outliers and all of that. What the people who excel at bug bounty ones are ones who have created custom tools to do very specific things to target that same vulnerability across multiple companies. Squiddy says, bug bounties, research bug classes, spray account programs get paid. Don't go after one company that is working for free. I took that maybe more different than how you meant it, but as if you create let's say a password spraying tool, like which focuses on a misconfiguration between OWA and Exchange that leaks credentials through error messaging. This seems like a very specific example I might be driving at. If you created that and then leverage that to test everyone against that, no one else is capable of doing that very specific test because it's something not capable. Like you have now created a tool to make it efficient to test that across multiple companies. Typically, that's where I'd think like a company of 5 individuals doing this, that's where they would thrive. But it would have to be formatted. Like if I was thinking about this, which I am, it would have to be formatted just like a CTF team. You have people with different skill sets. You'd have people with different coverages. You have some overlap, someone to bounce ideas off of, but someone who you can hit the full stack. And then you also have a program manager. Like one of the most important things within any CTF team, Nautilus said it, Cyphertext said it, is someone who can organize the team and say, at what point do you go, move on from this one, let's go after this one. Hey, this hasn't been looked at, and you have someone who's program managing the team.
Yeah, it's amazing. I knew that was the case because I have watched many teams compete over the years, and especially internally at my last position, we had teams that regularly competed, and especially the DEF CON CTF. You always knew that there was one person that was just like, "Hey, you guys are working on the same issue. Stop. One of you go work on something else. Stop duplicating effort. There's more things to do." It's interesting how much a CTF team looks like a small company.
Yeah. Well, and the other piece of this too is one of their jobs too is looking about how while everyone's deep in the technical things, standing up and looking, going, how are the points being calculated? How you do the same thing with a bug bounty program. Who's paying the most for certain things? And the people who figure this out in any contest typically are the ones who win. And I'll use my history with Darknet. Finding out that badge pairing would net way more points than solving some of the hardest challenges. So I could pair up with 10, 15 people, and that would be what, 10 points each. It was 150 points versus like some of the hardest challenges we're doing like 30 points or 40 points.
So we're getting to the top of the hour. What is the moral of today's story? What have we learned? What information have we gleaned from just debating each other a little bit on this? I think my takeaway from this is mostly, and I sort of already knew this. This is what I came in thinking would be the case, and I think getting your perspective helped on this. Is that these companies largely operate in different markets, and if we think just about the bug bounty aspect of it, the large companies are going to be trusted to do functionally bug bounty programs on pre-production code versus bug bounties for small companies are largely going to be on production code because of risk and access control and things like that. And that makes sense to me in terms of how you scope a company and what your market share that you're actually trying to go after is.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take?
I think my take falls into two categories. Ultimately, companies have to worry on two sides of things. They have to worry about strategy, policy, compliance. Like here's what we say we should be doing. Here's what we want to move towards. Here are the things that we feel are important. Here's how our network infrastructure is laid out, like a network architecture diagram. It amazes me how many enterprises don't have this, but small companies have the capability of building this from the ground up. All of the documentation. The other side of things is the testing, operational security. Let's pen test. Let's do network scanning. Let's do all of the technical things. Those are really the two aspects. When it comes to a small company, typically they do operational stuff very, very well, and they need some strategy early on to make sure they continue doing the technical stuff well and then document it along the way. Enterprises, there is no way they can keep up with all the operational stuff they need. When your attack surface is that big, you're dealing with massive problems small companies don't need to deal with. Things like, data loss protection, like tagging certain classifications of data. Like, this is PHI, this is PII, this is social security numbers, this is HR information, like tagging that information, tracking it throughout the network, segmenting. Like, operationally, it's incredibly difficult to do all of these things in the large enterprise. So what ends up happening is this weird shift. Small businesses start operationally secure, but not on the policy governance side, and that's where they need help. Enterprises, it shifts, and it goes to they're very strong on the policy and procedures, and they have all that stuff documented, but operationally, they're massively weak. I think the piece which I've thought about more during this conversation, and going after that, is at what point does a company raise their head and realize we're moving too far operationally, we're moving too far policy-wise, and it's almost impossible to tell. Like that's why there's not a good way to tell about the maturity of a security program. There really isn't. Whether you're small or big.
I would agree with that. And that's why we get paid the big bucks.
I mean, I would agree with
because everything's broken forever.
When this is... Gosh, you talk about, like, again, going back to Uber. It wasn't even a clever fish. He legitimately went on that he needed to add his phone or her phone, I guess whoever it is. They had to add a phone to someone's two-factor. How did they do this? They spammed the hell out of their phone and then communicated over WhatsApp and said, effectively saying, hey, I'm part of IT. If you want the spamming to stop, go ahead and accept it. Like 200 requests later.
Wow.
And here's my takeaway, though. This isn't even a security awareness issue. Legitimately, I don't think it's a security awareness issue. How in the world is it allowed that they could spam it? Like, how is there not rate limiting? How is there ability to spam? So many of the human weaknesses I come back as like, nope, it's a technical glitch. People will be stupid. Einstein, I don't know if he actually said it, I might just say he said it, is that there's two things infinite: the universe and human stupidity. You can't stop social engineering. It's fine. And then that's okay. We can accept that. But gosh, can we work on the technical controls? I don't know. Everything's broken all the time, forever, the end. Return to monkey. I don't have a strong takeaway outside of just, it is a very difficult balance, and this is why you need someone whose core focus, at least part-time at the company, is strategy and what do we do, when do we do it. Works for CTFs and it works for bug bounties and it works for everything, is that building up a strategy of what do you do next. So with that, that's my takeaway. What do you have for us as we close on up?
I think I'm going to look forward to doing more of these. I think we should do a more technical one for our next stream. We may have to, if next week, I just found out I'm flying back in late or early on Saturday. So for next week, we may have to push by an hour if I'm going to stream. But yeah, we should get back to these. I've been missing them, even though it's just because I've been busy. And you know, I have a long-standing statement about the summer. I hate summer. I hate it. It's too busy. Every weekend is like a social draining because I'm always doing something. I'm traveling somewhere. I'm spending time with family. And it's not that I hate my family or hate my friends. It's just that sometimes I need to go curl up in my room and pretend they don't exist. So like we're finally getting into Fat Boy Fall, where I can curl up in my room with a pumpkin spice latte and a donut and pretend the world doesn't exist for a bit as it gets cold outside again.
The comment I'll have on the pumpkin spice latte. So I have an espresso machine. I was all excited because I had a leak and I ended up fixing it. And I fixed it. And I'm laughing because Melissa, when we wake up, I make her a latte every morning. And she has all these creams she buys, because I do espresso and then do like half almond milk or coconut milk and then half some sort of cream. And she has pumpkin spice latte. There's like caramel. There's an almond one. There's oatmeal. There's like this oatmeal cookie one. There's like 50 different ones. And every single time I go, hey, which one do you want? He goes, pumpkin spice. Pumpkin spice. Every single time. I'm like, why are you buying all the other ones if all you want is a pumpkin spice latte? And then I saw like Gator post on Twitter and he's like, I have my pumpkin spice latte, and he's done it a couple times. I'm laughing. I'm like, am I the only one who doesn't have pumpkin spice?
No, I actually hate both pumpkin spice and lattes. So that was just for the memes. I legitimately cannot drink any form of coffee that isn't black. So like my soul.
For me, I'll take any type of coffee. It doesn't matter. Cold, hot, cream, not cream. Like there's no bias here. It's the only thing. The funniest one I had is that I have a soft spot for like Folgers, like way too strong, because my first job, that's what it was. It was that like way too strong. It was wake up juice, because like 4 a.m. and all there was Folgers. So the only way to be able to drink it would be cover it in cream and sugar. With that, in this random tangent, I very much miss you. I can't wait to continue our conversation. Aww. And the one I am laughing about, it's been a month since DEF CON, and me and you probably need to catch up what happened, and then what we're going to do next year. But with that,
that's a good question. Yeah, maybe we'll have to schedule a stream on that specifically about what the plan is once we get a chance to, or maybe we just do it live and discuss it on stream and get ideas from people. That's not a bad idea.
I like that idea. We should do that next week. And with that,
all right.
As always, thank you for watching. And hack on.